Good afternoon and welcome to week 4. We would like to begin by saying just how grateful we are that we have gotten such positive feedback and interactions from our community. That has given us the push to keep going. Obviously, we wish there was absolutely no need for podcasts like this one, and that domestic violence and domestic violence related incidents, issues, and concerns were completely eradicated. However, since we do not live in a world like that yet, we plan to continue on. I'm Sherry, and this is Jen. Here is just a brief recap of what we covered during last week's podcast. Youth and dating relationships and potential quote-unquote red flags indicating this already is or could become an abusive relationship. We reviewed ways to monitor and keep your children safe while on social media. And we also gave resources for you and or your child to reach out in the event that there is a concern about your child and domestic violence. And just a reminder, the National Dating Abuse Hotline is 866-331-9474, or you can text LOVE IS, which is one word, to 22522. There's also a live chat that is available 24/7. Jen?
Hey everybody, happy Saturday. I'm going to start as always with the National Domestic Violence Hotline number, which is 1-800-799-7233. And you can also text HOME to 741-741. One of the biggest resources right now for a lot of you is us. So it's pretty awesome. Reach out to us at thehelpsavefoundation.org. You can get a direct link to our email, or you can get us through Facebook if you just go onto the Help Save Foundation's page. I really want to start off today by thanking Lori Crosley, who watches the show every single week. She asked some really great questions that end up leading to more private messages from other people. One of them last week had to do with DCF, and it's a question that I get a lot. Another thing that we do here at the Help Save Foundation is we really walk victims into what's going to be happening step by step once they come forward. And it's part of the process of helping them become survivors. And the reason that I do this and I focus so much on this is because in coming forward, I had no idea what to expect. And so I try to pass on to other women and men that are coming forward what to expect so that you can be semi-prepared and you're not as caught off guard as I was. So when it comes to DCF, you know, majority of people think negatively immediately. The first thing they think is someone's coming to take my children. They're coming to investigate me. This is not going to be good. I have things to. It's not exactly the case. You have to tell your story in order for them to understand where you're coming from. Now, I didn't learn that DCF would be involved in my case coming forward until I came forward. And it was already stressful enough getting to the police station. I personally, at that point, had been in a safe house for 2 days. My abuser had come to kill us. I had finally mustered up the courage to get to the police station and give them this audio message that my son's father had left on their phone saying that he was coming to kill us. That was how I came forward. Now, I had been separated from my abuser for 2 years at that point. And as I was explaining everything to the police officer, and the police officer did a fine job and ended up calling the judge at home and getting an immediate restraining order that day. So I knew that I had to go back into hiding. But as I'm thinking of all of this and all of these very scary details that are about to come forth with a restraining order being sent out, and the fact that now I felt I was in more danger, I was told we're mandated reporters and we do have to call DCF. So I left there a mess because now I'm thinking, oh my God, what did I do? I didn't do anything wrong. They're going to come and take my children. I've been involved in this horrific relationship for 13 years. What are they going to do? So prior to me coming forward with all of my abuse, the DCF officer, when she received my file from the police station, all she knew was that there was a very threatening message and that a restraining order had been filed. It was immediate, and that I was in a safe house. So when she reached out to me, of course, I was very nervous. I had no clue what to expect from her. And when she came out to the house, again, very nervous. First intake was, you know, who I was, what my children were going through, what they had seen, what they had heard, why I came forward, what made this message happen. Why was I still, after being away from my abuser for 2 years, why was I still allowing my sons to see him? And I tried to explain the fact that he had never hurt the children in a physical way. And I felt as though if I was out of the situation, meaning I wasn't there and present, then they weren't seeing any abuse. And we didn't have any issues that I knew of at that point. So I allowed them to go. The other biggest factor as to why my children still saw him was fear. And we all knew what would happen, meaning we all, my sons and I, had I said no, he could no longer see the children. So that becomes a big part of this whole situation with DCF. So now here's this DCF woman. She's in front of me. She's asking me all these questions, making me feel like hell at first because, you know, I did let my children go. And no, he hadn't hurt my children physically, but I was in fear of not letting them go and what the ramifications were going to be of that. So after she left in the intake, they decided that they were going to investigate me for some sort of neglect because I was still allowing my children to go there. Therefore, they felt that I was putting my children in danger. So this young man came out to the house a few weeks later, very awesome, talked to the boys, talked to myself, really dove into everything. So now at this point, my story's come out a little bit. We've gone through the 2 weeks of the restraining order. This young guy's at my house, younger than me, asking me all these questions. I let him listen to the audio. And he basically looked at me and said, so why did you still let them go? And I said, well, because if I hadn't, what happened was exactly what I knew was going to happen. And he said, what was that? So my sons had been going to their father's house until the point that they couldn't take the abuse they were seeing there anymore. So they were in so much fear themselves of their father that they would never tell me when they would come home on the weekends or every other weekend what they were going through there and the abuse that he was putting onto the woman that he was living with at the time. So one of these weekends, the boys came home and they were a complete wreck. And I asked them, what the heck is going on? What's happening? And they broke down and they told me everything. So me being the person I am and knowing who I was dealing with him, I didn't call him. I didn't say anything. I didn't overreact. I did nothing. I just sat there. And on a Wednesday, he called to set up when he was going to be picking up the boys that weekend. And it was then that I explained to him that he was no longer going to be seeing them, that they were never going to be going to his house again, that he was still abusing women. He was still abusing women in front of my children as if they hadn't seen enough with me already, and that he wasn't going to be going there. They weren't going there anymore. Well, Brian, my abuser, did exactly what the boys and I knew he was going to do. He flipped out. He that night left a very disturbing message on my then 12-year-old son's cell phone explaining explicitly how he was coming to murder us. I heard the message. Immediately, we went to a safe house. We stayed there. When we came out is when I went to the police department. So see, DCF knew nothing about my situation originally when they came in. They just knew that my sons had gone to a home that was very dangerous, that I was in a very dangerous situation, and they didn't understand why I was allowing my children to go back to that very dangerous situation. By the end, after listening to the message and not only knowing and understanding that he did actually come to kill us, we were just in a safe house. So when he arrived at my home, no cars were there. So therefore he couldn't kill us, but he did. And until you're able to tell someone at DCF or someone that's coming to investigate you why you can't do certain things, why you could never leave that situation, please know that they don't understand. They're reading a report. That report gives them very minor details unless you've really elaborated in the police department. If you haven't, then they have this piece of paper that basically says, you know, this is what happened. Children are involved. They have to investigate it. But again, it wasn't until they came and talked to me and talked to my sons that they understood fully why we could not possibly say no. Our lives were literally in danger. And that proved positive because, again, he came to kill us once I removed the children from his life. So for me, you know, I think it's important because, again, like I get a lot of calls about DCF. I walk a lot of men and women through the process of what happens when you come forward and the fact that DCF is coming into your life, it's not a choice. It's the way it is. And you can either cooperate with them and give them all the information and give them an understanding of why exactly things happen the way they did, or you can be defensive, not do anything, and it's going to be a very long, hard road to get through. I tried very hard to explain that to my men and women. Most of them, after I've explained my own situation, understand how important it is to make sure that you're not defensive. They're not there to take your children. They're actually there to protect you and your children. And once they realize why you weren't able to do certain things, they're going to give you resources and they're going to help you in ways that you never knew they were able to help, because in your head, DCF, again, is just a bad organization that comes and takes your children. Well, again, they're not. And there's a lot of resources that they can provide that others don't provide that are very, very helpful to us in that situation. I'm very glad that DCF was part of my life, because they helped my court case tremendously. Because after speaking to me and after speaking to the boys and speaking to their father, they realized there was not a shadow of a doubt that this man had come to kill us, that this man was very dangerous, and that there were no choices that I had. That my only choice at the time was to try to keep myself and my sons as safe as possible. So again, understand that DCF is not there to ruin your life. DCF is there to help you, just like many of the other agencies that we as victims don't realize are there to help us. We've been manipulated and brainwashed for years and years that no one is there for us, and that is not true. There are really so many resources that are. Would you like to add anything to that, Sherry?
I was just going to say, well, first of all, thank you, because, I think sometimes people might think that, when Jen can come out and have these conversations, that it's just, oh, look how easy that is for her. And she's obviously so composed and, and willing to share these things. But, as she's telling you these stories, again, keep in mind that, this was years and years of trauma. And at this point, this is also Jen, and she's in a different place than maybe some people might be. And so, as she's saying these things and doing this, a huge piece of this is to, again, not only make sure everybody knows that you're not alone and that there are resources, but again, and again, not everybody's the same, and we understand that, but please know that there is life after this. And there is, Jen, again, everyone's an individual, but when you hear her and she's able to have these conversations and she's doing what she's doing and being an advocate, again, that doesn't mean that that's what everybody needs to do, but just looking at her being able to do this and share these experiences with you and this information, again, there's healing that happens, there's processing that happens, and now, this is for her, and I'm not trying to speak for her, but this is another step in her journey. And so I just wanted to say that as we continue today, because Jen uses a lot of her own personal experiences, obviously, when we do these podcasts. And again, she does that to make sure that her experience, again, it wasn't in vain, and that she's able to now help people. And I know that may go without saying, but I feel like it's something for me that I wanted to acknowledge today, because a lot of today's information really comes from Jen's personal experiences, as do most of the podcasts that we're doing. So that being said, I will just piggyback that, I have a lot of, obviously I work with a lot of children that are DCF involved, and I have in the past as well, in residential, in group homes, and I do now in counseling. I also have a lot of colleagues that work for and with DCF. And, again, as Jen said, I know it's difficult to keep in mind that you've been through so much and you're finally at this place to speak up, but they're walking into a situation with fresh eyes, and they're walking into a situation that, it's not to minimize it, but their focus has to be where it has to be, which is the children, and making sure that they're safe. And so it's not to dismiss whatever's going on with the parent in that situation, but they have to first, it's kind of like a laser focus on making sure immediately that these children are safe. And then, you're allowed to kind of let the story unfold to figure out what's going on. And as Jen said, and then once you're able to do that and they're able to do that, they can be the biggest advocates. They can be advocates as far as getting your children, counseling if needed and if wanted. They can also work with you to do the same thing, do family counseling, things like that. Again, things that maybe even, a month ago thought were absolutely impossible, to have in your life. So I just wanted to, again, thank you, Jen, for that's a lot of, personal information that you're putting out there for the benefit of others. And I think it needs to be acknowledged that I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And um, the reason that my life is an open book is mainly to I'm a weird, so I don't want to say I'm a weird stigma, but for instance, when I even go into colleges and stuff and I start speaking, the one thing I do, because I am very well composed at this point in my life, anyone that knew me prior to 2013, from 1999 to 2013, would have never thought that. They would have just seen this very quiet, timid, fearful woman. And I typically start, and on one of our episodes, I'm sure we'll get to that, because I think it's important for people to understand that I got to where I am today because of the strength that I consistently possessed for myself, because of the advocacy that I consistently did for myself. And I start off all of my speeches with adult audiences with my impact statement, because my impact statement from when I was in court truly shows who I was at that point. I was very broken. I was a total mess. You can hear it in my voice. You can hear it in my words. And I start with that because most people, when they see me originally, they think of me as this strong, independent, like got my shit together kind of person. But I wasn't for many years. And when I came forward, I was not the same person that I am today. I've built off of that strength, but that's not who I was. And it's important for people to see that other side of who I was then and who I am now, because that's what made me a survivor. And that's what I want to do for other women. I want them to understand that that place that you are when you're going through everything, and that person that you will become when it's all done, is two different people. And you never see that person, and you don't understand that person because you don't understand your own capabilities until you're forced to be in that situation. And you can either rise or succumb. I rose. And when I left court, everybody there knew that I was going to do something because I rose. And I want to give that to every single person that we reach, every person that contacts us through the foundation, like anybody that needs that. If I can do it, you can do it. There's no bounds there. And so thank you. I appreciate you acknowledging that. But, that's why this foundation got started, because I wanted to be able to help women like me get to where I am, because I had no clue. And it was the first time and the most scariest situation I had ever been in my life. Of all the abuse that had happened for 13 years, honestly, one of the scariest moments was coming forward, because in an abusive relationship, you kind of know what to expect. Whether you're begging for your life daily or, there's some quiet and peace in the house, you at least have an idea what to expect. When you've come forward, that's a whole unknown that you know literally nothing about. And it's very scary to navigate on your own. And that's why we're here. We're here to help you navigate through it.
Thank you. So to switch gears a little bit from, what we were just talking about, and again, thank you, Jen. Another question that, as we pointed out, there's been a myriad of questions that have come through the Help State Foundation. And so, we've tried to spend some time looking at questions, and we figured today would be a good opportunity to answer some. We may do that again in the future, again, as questions come in. As Jen mentioned, they certainly can become a topic, and they have become a topic for our podcast. So another question that was posed this week was, what do you think about therapy for abusers? And so before I even start that conversation, I want to be very clear that, none of what I'm about to say means that I'm minimizing, what an offender has done, and that, I'm ignoring these past behaviors. I'm ignoring these criminal charges. I'm ignoring all that. I'm coming at this question from a clinical perspective. I'm also coming at it from working in corrections for over 12 years. So I've worked with abusers and offenders in trying to work towards understanding, acknowledgement, and getting them to a place that that they will not reoffend in the community. And that's the reality, that we can say that hopefully people will be put away for X, Y, and Z amount of time, but I think we'd be fooling ourselves to think that that's what's going to happen. Excuse me. People go back out into our communities, and so I would, and I think most people would want them to be less violent and to be acknowledging their crime and have a willingness to change. So one of the most difficult things, however, about working with offenders of domestic violence um, is the denial that they have that they've done anything wrong. And so for initially trying to break through that denial and confront and address does absolutely take time. And I will be honest with you, it can take a long time. But I do believe, just to answer the question, that yes, that you can do therapy and that it can be successful. I'll be honest with you, I don't know the statistics on how successful treatment has been, but I can only go by, again, my own experiences. And like I said, until you break through the barrier of denial, it it's not as successful. But once you do, I can be honest with you, yes, it's very difficult. And I mean, imagine holding up a mirror to yourself and having to look at the worst things that you could possibly have ever done, and having to admit that you're the one that perpetrated those crimes and you're the one that perpetrated those violent acts. And because of you have caused so much damage and trauma in the lives of the alleged people I should say, the people that you allegedly loved, excuse me. So, the theory behind doing treatment is that if you can learn to be violent, you can learn to not be violent. And so let me just say a quick example, just to give people an idea that, if you grow up in a household where, and I'm going to use the stereotypical male being the perpetrator just for this, but if you grow up in a household that you are constantly hearing your father berate your mother, telling her she's nothing, she's useless, she's hopeless, calling her names, just hearing those things, never mind if you start to actually see the physical abuse happen. But now in your mind, even if your gut's kind of telling you that that doesn't seem right, but you're growing up in a household that that's how we treat women, you start to internalize that. You may not outwardly say that, but you do start to internalize that as a child. And now imagine, being groomed by your male parent, by your father, who is now, and I put it this way, that he's berating, he's doing all these horrible things, he's physically, possibly sexually assaulting your mom. But on the flip side of that, that's not what he's showing you. So on the flip side of that, after he's just done all these horrible things, the next thing you know, he takes you by the hand and he's going to go take you for ice cream. He's going to go throw the ball with you. So he's building a much different relationship with you. He's building a relationship that he is showing you that he's the person that you can trust, that he's the good guy. So that's going on for years and years and years. And that, again, when I say it's internalized, it is internalized. And it's a confusing way to feel, because on one hand, this is your mom and you don't want to see someone that you love being treated like that. And on the other hand, the person who's doing these things and perpetrating these horrible acts is treating you like a king. So that is a very confusing thing for a child. And what happens is, again, they get older, and this doesn't happen to everybody. Again, I'm generalizing just to make a point, but then they get older, and if that's all you've seen, that this is how we treat women, that this is how we treat the people that we love, now you've internalized that. There are also a myriad of other reasons why it happens. That's why I'm saying it's just one example that I'm using. But my point ultimately is that that is still a learned behavior. This is all still learned because you're modeling. His father was modeling this behavior for him, and now he's taken that, and this is what he thinks is supposed to be how he is in a relationship. Again, there are so many other factors that come into play here, depending on things that they're allowed to watch. I'll be honest with you, there are some children that are allowed to watch very, very violent sexual pornographic videos at a very young age, and they also internalize that this is also how we're intimate with our partner. And again, I'm not getting into a debate about pornography and things like that. I'm just making the point that at a young age, you don't realize how much your children are taking in until when you see that this is okay, and again, it's condoned by this person who you love and who respects you and treats you so great and gives you everything. You start to think that this is okay. So, just to follow up on that, as far as treatment, and I can be quick on this part, but the main treatment that is utilized for offenders in domestic violence situations is called CBT. And I know many people know CBT. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. And basically, it attempts to change the person's behavior, and it's by identifying thought processes and beliefs that have contributed to the offender's violence. They're encouraged to think about and change their understanding of violence, examine the circumstances surrounding their violence, and disrupt the cognitive chain that leads to their commission of violent acts of domestic abuse. So you work with them by demonstrating, excuse me, demonstrating how offenders use violence as an anger outlet. Part of CBT is also anger management. You know, also focus on, you know, that all of the components of their act, so obtaining compliance from their victims and how they empower themselves with a sense of control. And you work to try to change their thoughts again about violence. You teach them cognitive behavioral techniques such as communication skills, nonviolent assertiveness, social skills, and like I said, anger management. There are also other methods that people utilize. One is called the Duluth model, which I don't necessarily practice. And this just basically focuses on the fact that domestic violence is a social and cultural patriarchal ideology that historically has allowed men to control women through power and violence. It doesn't take into account or even it doesn't allow the perpetrator and also during the therapy to bring into things like mental or behavioral health issues, substance use, anger, stress, nothing. And so again, for me, it doesn't necessarily work with the theories that I go by, because the truth is, when you look at the Addiction Center's website, in 2020, nearly 80% of domestic crimes are related to the use of drugs. Now, again, that does not mean that we excuse someone's behavior because they have an addiction, because they're using drugs or alcohol. That doesn't mean we say, well, because they were high, or well, because they were drunk. That's not what we're talking about in any way. What I'm saying is that you can see that there is a huge correlation between these two things. And so in addition to CBT and other treatments, we also look at doing a dual diagnosis treatment. So detox, you know, outpatient support, recovery, sober supports, you know, that has to play a part in this. You know, if somebody's violent acts increase tenfold when they're under the influence, that also needs to factor into this. There cannot be any healing, there cannot be any changes in behavior if you're under the influence. So sometimes what has to actually happen first is the detox and the drug and alcohol treatment. And once that's done and the person is finally in a place of sobriety, then you can actually have these conversations with them. Because again, when we talk about denial, what is, again, one of the number one issues to getting treatment is denial. So again, you have to work through that and get to a place of admitting that there is a problem, and there's not just one problem. And so we need to work on all of it in order to get someone to, excuse me, a place of nonviolent interactions and acknowledging, again, their crime, so that we can, you know, again, move on. Like I said, not everybody's staying in jail for the rest of their life. So you want healed people. You want people who are willing to work and willing to change out in our communities. Anything
Absolutely.
else?
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head when you said, you know, domestic violence abusers do not stay in jail forever unless they've murdered somebody. They're not staying in jail forever, okay? Because, I mean, my own situation, my case was, so I am one of now 8 victims, okay? There were 4 women before me, myself, and 3 women after me. Crazy to think that there were actually able to be 3 women after me, but sure enough. In 2013, my case came up. 2014, he was convicted. In 2018, so in the meantime, there was another case going on against him at the same time as mine. Well, right after mine, actually. And then in 2018, they released him. And within 3 months, he found another woman and was abusing her the same. Again, these men and women, they do get out of jail. Unless they have committed a fatality, they're not going to be in jail forever. And that's a pretty scary thought for a lot of us. Some of you that know me and know my story know that last summer was one of the worst summers, you know, for my entire family, because not only did my abuser get out of jail, he was not convicted, he was arrested on more charges of domestic violence from somebody completely different. And he went to court, was told basically by his lawyers that he was looking at a lot of time at this point because we had successfully got him into a superior court level. And when I say we because when I talk about advocating for yourself, I've been advocating for myself and against him since 2013. every single trial that's come up that he has been involved in, that I've been able to be involved in, I've been. Every parole board hearing, whether I've been here in the state of Massachusetts for my trial or in the state of Rhode Island for somebody else's trial. I have written a letter if I couldn't be there because I wasn't allowed because I wasn't the victim in that case, or I've stood up for myself at my own parole board hearings. With this latest victim, this past February, not this February, the February before, I'm sorry, they had called me in because they wanted me to testify in his dangerousness hearing. I once again advocated and was there. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with me anymore, but it does, because his release is a part of my safety, my overall safety for myself, my children, and my family. So the therapy part is really important. And, in my case, I don't find that there's rehabilitation for him, but that's because he chooses to not want rehabilitation. That's because I remember him saying to me for 13 years that he loved the fact that people feared him, that there was nowhere that he could go, that all he had to do was give them this really evil look that he had mastered. And he loved the fact that just looking at you, you were running in a corner, male or female. And believe me, I've seen many males a little bit less in stature than him do the same exact thing that I was doing, because he's a very scary individual. But there are others that do seek help and do get help and go on to live good lives afterwards because they have accepted what they have done. They know that it was wrong, whether it been drug or alcohol induced, or just the fact that, they did see that their entire lives, and that is all that they know. And I want to piggyback that a little bit with why it's so important for the children. So, and the therapy part of it for the children. I ended up being a single mom with 2 kids, one child that literally had watched me be abused until he was 12 years old. There was a lot of work that I had to do to make sure that, as Sherry said earlier, it's a learned behavior. So you can learn to not have that behavior if you choose to. So now I'm bringing up 2 sons, 2 males that I absolutely do not want to ever follow in their father's footsteps. And they don't want to ever follow in their father's footsteps. So they have advocated for themselves. They take action for themselves. They do things that are going to make them better people because that was instilled in them at a young age. There's a lot of things that were instilled in them at a young age that I've had to undo, but that's because they wanted to. That's because they understood how bad he was and the person he was, and they never wanted to be anything like him. They never wanted to be in that situation. And so is there hope and is there help for the people who are on the side of abusing? Yeah, but they have to be willing and wanting to accept that.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, I think, most people might say, well, isn't that the case with all treatment? And yes, you have to be willing, to acknowledge a lot of things that, may be painful. And, I think one of the things too that I didn't mention is that, it's not just that the other parent is, is trying to groom their child to only, to have this relationship with them and only trust them, but who's to say, and this does happen, so I don't know what, I shouldn't say who's to say, but that, that the father isn't also threatening that child as they're growing up and letting them know that, again, not to say anything, and they're also in a state of fear. And, what people also, don't always know is that, again, just like other negative feelings, fear is obviously a negative feeling, you internalize that as well, and it can come out in a lot of different ways. And so again, you don't know exactly how this child has been groomed, and grooming, a lot. I know we talk a lot about that when we just talk about, sexual, assaults on children and grooming and things like that. It is the same thing, you know what I mean? In the sense that, again, you're grooming someone to have this trusting relationship with you. And a child can't always decipher between, again, the rights and the wrongs. Again, they may have a gut feeling that something doesn't feel right, but they're still trying to process these things as a kid. And so again, similar to, someone who's being predatory to a child, they do make those threats. They do get to a point of saying, again, like, even though they don't let you know it's wrong, they still kind of give you that idea, like, don't say anything, don't tell anybody, this is a secret. They make the secret into a fun thing between you and I. And don't these similar things do happen to children growing up in a domestic violence situation. But as Jen is saying, just because that's happened in this household, that doesn't necessarily mean it happens in other households. So she's now raising children that is the furthest thing from their mind as far as the kind of adult male partner that they want to be as they're getting older. So a lot of times it does depend on the supports that you get right away, and and then that's not just counseling. It also includes familial supports as well, that you have a family kind of surrounding this family saying, we believe you, we want to support you, what can we do? And we're here to listen. So, and we're patient, so that's also a big part of it too, is the supports that you do have when you've been in these situations.
That's awesome. That's really a great point. I'm really happy that you said that, because something that was said to me that was very profound after I had first come forward, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to navigate, like bringing up these boys, making sure they weren't going to be anything like him. Like, what was I going to do? And somebody said to me, I'll never forget, he said, surround them with love. At this point, do nothing but surround them with love. And I did. And I made sure that every single person that my sons were around were people that supported us. They were never people that asked us why. They were never people. And some of these people were people that had been around us for 13 years and saw pictures of me smiling and thought, my life was the greatest life, not realizing that, 5 hours later, I was going to be getting knocked around. But one of the most profound things that was said to me that made me realize I was going to be okay was my children were in schools. We were in Fairhaven, and they were in Hunter was in middle school in 7th grade. And I'll never forget, we were at an outside event. It had nothing to do with the school, wasn't sports related, nothing. And the resource officer from the school, who literally saw my son every single day, just came to me and said, I just want to pull you aside and tell you that you're doing a great job and that you have successfully broken the cycle of violence with your children. And to me, I saw my sons every day, right? So I saw the goods and I saw the bads, and I was like, oh my God. And you never know what your children are like on the outside when they're not with you, right? So here's my son going through a trial, going through some of the worst things in his life, having to possibly testify, which he chose to do against his father. And here was this resource officer who was also a police officer, who saw my son every day, who was compassionate to him and looked at me and was like, this kid's amazing. He cares about people. He's helpful to people. Like, you can tell that he doesn't have a lot of those characteristics that you're probably so worried about. And you've really done a great job. And I don't take full credit for that. And whenever people say you've done a great job, I always say to them, you are part of my great job. You are part of my journey. You are who helped me become who I was. When I needed a shoulder to cry on, or I had no idea what to do, I'm a single mom raising 2 boys from an abusive relationship. I knew what I wanted for them, but I also knew what, as you were saying earlier, they had been groomed for. And with my 2 sons, my older son was a lot like me. Very caring, very compassionate. And their father didn't like that. So he immediately kind of pushed him to the side and started grooming the younger of the 2, who was only 3 years old, 5 by the time we left. Thankfully, we got out in time that he wasn't able to do the damage that he would have really liked to have done with that child. But it's a grooming process. It took years to get a lot of the mentality that he had set into their brains out, for them to realize that, no, those were not good behaviors. And luckily, they had seen enough and been around enough and had enough love in them already that they knew that those behaviors were not acceptable and they wanted nothing to do with that. And I just think it's so important, because when it comes to the therapies, you have to think about your kids too, because the children that are affected by domestic violence, that's our future. And we want to stop it, and we want to break that cycle. And you as a parent, you as a grandparent, as an aunt, an uncle, you have a huge role. And that role is to help break that cycle so that you're not raising what you just got away from. Very, very important.
Absolutely. So I am actually going to wrap up on my end today. I know there was something that Jen also wanted to touch on today, that has come up multiple times in our podcast, and came up again this week. So I'm going to turn it all over to Jen.
So something that has come up a lot, excuse me, is the compassion release for inmates. Believe me, I feel for you on this one. My abuser actually also filed right in the beginning for compassion release and was denied. Again, I'm going to say this repeatedly because I truly believe that it is the reason that I am here today. Advocate, advocate, advocate for yourself. No one can advocate for you better than you can advocate for yourself. So there are certain things right now. There's a lot of people that are applying, a lot of inmates, a lot of domestic violence inmates that are applying for the compassion release. And there are certain things that you need to have in order to help yourself. Please understand, the courts are flooded right now. They're still in session. Domestic violence cases are still being heard every day. Our prosecutors are doing the best that they can. And understand that a prosecutor is not who makes the decision on whether the inmate is going to be released or not. Just like the sheriff's office does not make a decision on whether the inmate is going to be released or not. It's the judge. So we need to make sure that the prosecutor that is going to be there to help you and keep this person, male or female, behind bars for your safety and society's safety, we need to make sure that they have everything that they need to properly go in front of a judge and explain to a judge why he or she should not be released. One of the most important things is having a restraining order. I understand that people do not look at RO orders, restraining orders, in a positive light. A lot of people feel that a restraining order is just a piece of paper, and you're absolutely right. And I personally feel the same way. Restraining orders are upheld and are, how do I say it? People who have restraining orders against them and are law-abiding citizens, they do what they're supposed to do. People who are criminals, people who are abusers, people who just don't care, they see that as a piece of paper and they're going to do whatever they want and pray that they don't get caught for it. So yes, it is just a piece of paper, but it's also documentation. It's documentation of what that person has done to you, what that person is capable of, and why they don't belong in society to do it to somebody else. The average person that commits domestic violence does not do it once. They do it repeatedly until they're punished. And in my case, even when they're punished and they're set free, they do it again. So therefore, you need to make sure that you have the documentation, such as a restraining order. Go ahead, Sherry.
I'm so sorry. No, I did not mean to cut you off. It
Oh,
just
no.
when you mentioned that, and I was thinking dangerousness here, and that's what just went. And it just goes over and over in my head that that's part of that process. So if anyone doesn't know what that means, like a dangerousness hearing, which why would you if you wouldn't need to? Part of that is this is why this person doesn't get bail, and this is why this person, or this why this person's bail is set so high. But usually it's this person does not get bail. So if the judge determines that when they do the dangerousness hearing, that they cannot be out in society while they're awaiting trial, then they don't get bail. And so part of that process and that information and all of that is restraining orders, broken restraining orders. So all of that is documented. So again, I didn't mean to interrupt you. It just popped in my head because I've worked with so many inmates that have gone for dangerousness hearings. Mental health had nothing to do with whether or not they were considered dangerous. But at the same time, working with them, I know just a lot about how that process works. And Jen is 100% right on that. Documentation is so important. Again, if you're thinking, well, what's the point? Even if that is the only point, right, that you have it documented, that is on their record. If they do break it, that is also on their record. They also go back to jail. They stay in jail longer. So all of these things just are extremely important when you're thinking about whether or not you want to even, spend the time doing the order, because it is important. And you don't have to do the order by yourself. I used to work in the court system with domestic violence, with the victims, and we used to help them fill out whatever they needed to fill out in order to take up in front of the court. So I just wanted to add.
And it piggybacks on itself because, again, it is very important. And in some cases, people have more than one restraining order. Yeah. For instance, in my personal case, there was a time where there were 9 active restraining orders on him. Only 3 of them were from us, but there were 2 other women. So now we had 9 active restraining orders. That is important for a judge to see. If a judge, if a prosecutor is going in front of a judge and trying to explain how dangerous this man is to society, the person that they abused and other people that could be in the future, and yet there's no documentation that this man has ever done anything wrong, then that's very hard for a prosecutor to try to show a judge. Another thing is, the courts are working really hard, as I said before, and we have a lot of advocates, like Sherry said, within the courts that help you with things like this. And the advocates right now are calling. They're calling all of the survivors of domestic violence. So as these petitions for compassionate release are coming up, what their job is at this point is to contact the people that are involved, which are the survivors, and say, hey, what information can you give us? What are you willing to be there? Has anything happened? They're trying to get as much information from us, the survivors, as possible. Again, so that when they go before the judge, they have all of this concrete information. They're not just standing in front of the judge saying, yes, well, judge, I think that Tom Stone should absolutely be held in here because that's what I think, because I was told he's a danger to the system. No, you need information. And that information coming from you, and you being a survivor and being willing to cooperate and willing to be part of your case, that is going to help you. I cannot express enough how much advocating for yourself is going to help you. Through my case, I contacted everybody involved. I mean, I had their personal numbers. I knew everything because they knew they weren't getting anything. They knew that if they had a question, they could come to me. If I had a question, I was calling them. I didn't care if it was 10 times a day, I was calling them until I got my answer. That's when they know no balls can be dropped for you, because guess what? You're on top of it. You're paying attention. You're involved. Very important, your involvement, extremely important. The last thing that we talk about, and we have talked about it a few times today, is documentation. So be prepared. That's, again, why I do what I do, is to prepare everybody for what's coming next. So here we are, and we're preparing you for what's going to happen when someone calls you for the compassionate release. Think of everything and write it down. This way, when that advocate calls you and asks you questions, you're not trying to fumble in your mind and think about like this day and that day and what were the exact dates and where was I? Have it all written down. This way, when you look at it and you're being asked questions, it's all fresh in your mind. And you're not having to call back 5 times because you forgot this. And now you're getting frustrated because that advocate is now working on another case and thought they got all your information and doesn't get back to you for a couple days now, because our cases are not the only cases. Again, why you need to advocate for yourself. If the prosecutor only had 1 case for the entire month, you know what? That would be awesome. A, it would mean domestic violence was going down. B, it would mean all of his or her attention is completely on you and your case. That's not the case, though. Domestic violence is happening every single day. People are being arrested every day. People are going to jail. Restraining orders are still being issued. So therefore, now you become like 1 of 10 people for the day. So do you want to get lost in that shuffle a little bit, or do you want to make sure you're at the top of that pile because you were on top of this? So if you haven't received a call from an advocate and you are concerned about compassionate release, call the courthouse. Talk to somebody, ask for an advocate immediately, ask for your advocate as a domestic violence survivor and someone that comes forward. Once you get brought into the court system, you have an advocate in the police department. Every police department in this area has an advocate specifically for domestic violence. The courts also have an advocate specifically for domestic violence. They're there to help you. They sit there, they hold your hand, they get you through the entire court process. That's their job. Utilize them. Call them. You have questions, ask them questions. You have concerns, give them your concerns. If you feel like someone that's abused you, that is in prison, is possibly going to apply for compassionate release, call your advocate. Call the ADA that's on your case. Say, hey, listen, I'm here to answer any questions. This guy needs to, or woman needs to, stay behind bars. They can't be released. They're going to go out into the society and do more harm than good. But you have to advocate for that. And it's important to make sure that we're consistently advocating for ourselves. So I understand compassionate release. We went through a couple of days where I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? This is all dependent on the judge. But again, when they called, I answered my phone. I didn't let the phone ring because it was an unknown number that I didn't know. And that I actually got a call this week about compassion release. And that's why we're going over this today, because I've had them for like the last 2 months. And I tell everybody the same thing that I'm telling everybody here. One of the big things that I heard this week was, oh, yeah, man, I did get a call and I didn't answer it. And I just thought it was a telemarketer. No, it's the courts. They're calling to talk to you because your abuser has just applied for compassion release, and they don't the prosecutors don't want him or her to get it. So therefore, you have to answer your phone. Like, you have to be available to them. It's not a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week thing. It's a possibly 15-minute conversation that you're going to have with them that is going to either determine how hard they're going to be able to show that to the judge or not. So if we want to sit here and we want to be proactive and we want to make sure that these things don't happen, then again, we have to make sure we're doing what we can for ourselves, because we are one of many. If we were just the only ones, it would be easy for our prosecutors and easy for our law enforcement to help us. But it's not as easy because we're not one. There are so many of us. So that's how we're going to wrap up today. I know there's a lot of really, really bad stuff happening in our country right now, and we just hope for a lot of peace. And we're doing our part to bring as much peace into the world as possible. So I think individually, every single person has to really take a good look at themselves and really just, we're in a tough state right now, this whole entire place. So let's spread peace and love and not so much hatred. Once again, I'm going to end with giving you important phone numbers and how to get in touch with us. National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. Or if you have no access to a voice call, you can text HOME to 741-741. And as always, my email's open 24 hours a day. My phone rings 24 hours a day. So the Help Save Foundation at yahoo.com. You can get us on Facebook, and you can also get us through the website, which is thehelpsavefoundation.org. So thanks everybody for watching again. We appreciate your questions. We appreciate your comments. We're really, really excited that this is making a difference, and we're going to just keep going. So I don't know if you have any more, Sherry.
I don't. That's it. You said it perfectly. Thank you all very much. We appreciate it.
Yes, we do. So y'all have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Bye.